You know that feeling when everything just clicks? Your mind is sharp, your mood is steady, your body feels like it's firing on all cylinders. That's not luck, that's what your body is capable of every single day. Now, I've looked into a lot of fish oil supplements, and honestly, most of them are mystery-sourced, over-processed, blasted with heat, and packed with synthetic add-ins. But this one is different. Omega-3 Rejuvenate from Big Bold Health starts with wild Alaskan salmon and cod, sustainably caught from some of the cleanest waters on the planet, and then it's processed at low temperatures to preserve what actually matters. We're talking about real omega-3s, naturally occurring vitamins A and D, and pro-resolving mediators, or PRMs, that help your body balance its own immune response. What does that mean for you? Clearer thinking, more stable mood, and real nature-based support for your heart and immune system. No shortcuts, no synthetic nonsense. And it was developed by Dr. Jeffrey Bland, a true pioneer in the world of complementary health. If you want to feel the difference, go to bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman. That's bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman and use code Hoffman for 20% off site-wide. Once you feel it, you'll know. Welcome to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hoffman. Today we're going to be talking about a new book, Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. That's the title of a book by today's guest. He's Dr. Sherrod Paul. Dr. Paul is a physician in New Zealand. He comes to us across the date line because as we record this, this is a day earlier than it is for him. Although fortunately, it's not an ungodly time. He doesn't have to wake up at 4 a.m. to talk to us here while I'm in New York. He's in Auckland, New Zealand. Am I correct? Is that where you reside? And it's tomorrow. And he's written a great book, which reflects his diverse interests. He's a skin cancer specialist, a family physician, but he's also a very Renaissance man. He's an evolutionary biologist, a storyteller, a social entrepreneur, and an adjunct professor at Auckland University of Technology. And interestingly, he's also gone afield from the practice of medicine to write works of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and medical textbooks. Well, medical textbooks is in the realm of medicine, of course. His new book, Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. And it's a very interesting book because it tackles the question of how much is predetermined, pre-programmed by our genes, and are certain health problems inevitable, or can we, by virtue of understanding our genes, modify our lifestyle, modify our habits, perhaps take certain supplements to overcome certain genetic liabilities. Is that a fair summary of your proposition?
Yeah, I think absolutely right. I think, like I've often said, genes are a blueprint, but they don't have to be our destiny. So I think we do, everything in disease, as you know, is 50% nature and 50% nurture. And so, you may inherit a certain number of genes from your parents, but genes are just fundamentally protein makers. So I think essentially if you do actions which are more suited to your genetic makeup, you make good proteins. And if you do adverse things, you get adverse effects. So I think generally, absolutely, like we have 50% control, even to control or to manage our risk for various diseases and live healthier and longer and fitter.
And that's what you mean by biohacking our genes. With an understanding, we now have the tools to assess our assets and liabilities genetically, and then key our behaviors, our lifestyle, whether it be exercise, sleep, or diet, or specific use of specific supplements, even medications, to optimize our genetic potential. It's a potential that we can shape.
Absolutely. And, it's quite astounding. Like every time I've looked into this over several years of research, what you find is it's astounding, the studies which come out at how much difference we actually can make and how much we can modify the outcomes, even if we have predispositions. I guess I tend to live at the more holistic end of the biohacking spectrum, where we're optimizing diet and exercise and nutrition based on genetic testing. Obviously, there's some people who operate at the very extreme end, trying to edit their own genes and use medications which are still not proven. And some of them have more side effects and, of course, have more risks. Mine is more, I think, accessible in the sense anybody can do it. And we try to keep it real.
And you give the example of Alzheimer's disease. And recently we actually did a podcast which details some of the information that you share in your book about our groupthink about Alzheimer's disease, that it's an amyloid disease, that we've gone down the path of very expensive drugs that are amyloid plaque busters that are designed to halt the progression of Alzheimer's, and with some degree of success, but at great expense and also at the risk of really severe side effects. And this is something that hits you home personally because you describe in the book you have a family history of Alzheimer's. And yet, in the book, you favor a more natural approach to this, using some of our known associations between various aspects of lifestyle and the likelihood of cognitive decline.
Yeah, I think particularly I'm talking about the MIND-diet, or the diet which is shown in
the MIND, MIND. That's an acronym for something, right? MIND.
That's right. Mediterranean Intervention Neurological Disease or something like that. And it's combined with the DASH, which is the diet to stop hypertension. Like it was originally a Mediterranean diet, which was looking at hypertension, and they combined it with that and made it the MIND diet. But what was interesting with it is that in most of the models, you can show that you get like a 50% reduction, which is better than what we have right now with a medication.
With the medication, yeah.
And I think that really, because as I talk about in the book, a lot of our Alzheimer's research went down the wrong path for a while. So we were looking at, the beta amyloid 56, AB56 hypothesis, which was actually flawed. There was some doctoring of papers and things like that. So now we know that there was literally, so for 20 years, everyone else is replicating the famous paper, which was about, and then they could not make any drugs effective. And now we know why, right? So now we know some new drugs are coming out. But I think till it's real, until it can make a massive difference, I think it's foolish for us to take stuff rather than when we have 50% control over a diet with which we can make a big difference.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And actually we did an entire podcast about what may be an instance of outright fraud, which led to, going down the rat hole of research that attempted to replicate essentially what was doctored images of, showing efficacy of some drug. So now you are a skin expert. However, you're a little iconoclastic in that you talk about the benefits of sunlight in your book. And that kind of keys into something that I talked about recently. I recently reported on an article in a dermatology journal entitled Sunlight, Time for a Rethink. And so are we changing our view about something? We want to put on SPF 50. We want to cover ourselves in UV protective clothing. We want to stay out of the sun. And yet, in your book, you point out that even as a dermatologist, and you deal with skin cancer all the time, that there's evidence that, sunlight exposure judiciously may be beneficial.
Yeah, I think partly we don't get enough sunlight. And from a point of view of, even other diseases which are shown to have an association with lower sunlight, like autism spectrum and various things. And I think certainly judicious exposure where you don't get burnt. We know that a sunburn increases the risk of melanoma.
A sunburn.
We also know,
right.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
But that does not necessarily equate to sun exposure.
That's right. And then prolonged sun exposure, like, your farmers or your builders, if you're not wearing protective clothing, can increase your risk of squamous cell carcinomas, which are the non-melanoma type of skin cancers. Basal cell skin cancer is also from intermittent exposure, but largely genetic in very Celtic populations. And I think, but melanomas are the ones which are lethal because melanomas kill an American every hour. But the key thing in melanomas are sunburns, which are blistering, or using sunbeds, and those kind of things increase your risk. But having said that, look, so that's from a skin cancer point of view. The other reason you avoid the sun is from an aging perspective, because obviously if you are in the sun a lot, your skin then wrinkles.
Photoaging is real because this is ionizing radiation, and exposure to that causes cross-linking of collagen, et cetera, the deal.
Absolutely. But what you find is that, so with sunscreens, I'm a fan of more mineral based sunscreens, but fundamentally, as you know, they form a film and they have not the chemicals which get absorbed into your system to absorb the UV, because they do have a fair bit of absorption. And I think a lot of the risks are sort of unknown at this stage, so I'm a bit wary of them.
Mm-hmm. The chemical sunscreens, you mean?
The chemical sunscreens, because
they're clear and they're invisible, but maybe not so great. And there are some question marks. I don't think as you state, I don't think it's conclusive, the case against them.
That's right. And I think partly because not enough studies have been done, but we certainly know that the absorption of them in our bloodstream is higher than the absorption after, say, you smoke a cigarette of nicotine, to use an analogy, but we haven't studied it enough to the same degree. But I think on the other hand, the reason we don't get enough sun exposure, even if you got your 20 minutes, we probably sometimes don't expose enough of our body surface area. So you need roughly 20% of your body surface area exposed to get enough UV absorption. Right. Okay. So that's roughly t-shirt and shorts kind of stuff. So if you're mostly more covered up, then you may not get that.
And so you're a big fan of vitamin D, and there's a lot in the book about vitamin D. And of course, as we know that, sunlight is one of the main ways that, unless we take vitamin D supplements, because food is not the greatest source of vitamin D, that we obtain our vitamin D. And so sunlight, judicious application of sunlight generates vitamin D. And you actually have some amazing statistics in the book about how, certain tribes in Africa can actually augment their uptake of vitamin D by combining vitamin D with some fermented drink that they use, and they have astronomically high levels of vitamin D in their system.
Yeah. And I think, look, from an evolutionary biology point of view, and I've mentioned this in a TEDx talk in the past, skin colors evolved because of the battle between vitamin D and folic acid. So as modern human beings came out of Africa, the skin darkened to preserve folic acid because folic acid gets destroyed by light.
Only fairly recently, genetic evidence is that this may have occurred only maybe 5,000 years ago, which is mind-bending.
So probably the modern man was like maybe 200,000 years ago. So, but still, it's still relatively recent in the scheme of things. And then what happened was, because it happens over centuries, what happens is, from a predictive modeling of our bodies being, so good at anticipating the changes, they developed high pre-vitamin D levels, because once your skin goes dark, you don't absorb vitamin D quite as well. Mm-hmm. So that's why subcontinent populations like in India, for example, actually have low vitamin D levels. And that's one of the reasons Africans are so good at track and field, for example, especially athletics, where there's speed and performance and running. And
right. You have a whole section on the relationship between vitamin D and athletic performance. And I think
very much so.
Yeah, there was an evidence that I think it was the Detroit hockey team. They were in a slump, and they decided that they needed to take vitamin D, and then all of a sudden they became champions, that there's actually really a relationship.
Absolutely. There's been done in Greek soccer players, things like that. So we definitely know that having optimal vitamin D levels help athletic performance. But we also know that alongside probiotics, they actually make even bigger difference. But conversely, the lower your vitamin D levels, not only it's a barometer of your health as well, so you tend to do poorly when it comes to many diseases if your vitamin D levels are not optimal.
And you actually mentioned a connection between vitamin D and autism, that there's autism spectrum disorder. And what's the evidence for that?
Yeah. So what we know is, we certainly know that in the last 20 years, autism spectrum has grown by something like 600%. And studies have been done in America, in the states which have more sunshine versus states which have less sunshine, and looking at the incidence. We also similar studies in places like China with urbanization and less sunlight exposure, because nowadays people are so much on devices and indoors. It does show a link. But I think the key thing with vitamin D there is there's a thing called the autism paradox, where people with autism have high serotonin levels in the blood but have low serotonin levels in the brain. And it was like a paradox, because people, why is that? Because for other people, they actually have the same, if you've got high levels, you've got high levels, or low and low. And what we know now is it's the vitamin D receptors which regulate it. And we also know that the fish oils make a big difference as well.
So fish oil is a companion nutrient for vitamin D is essential.
That's exactly. So we know that the EPA and the DHA are two different types of fish oils. We know that one implicates how the vitamin D is absorbed past the blood-brain barrier, and the second one is how it's utilized. So we know that in combination, even, for example, in pregnant women in the second trimester, if their diet doesn't have enough omega-3, the evidence that shows that they may increase the risk of having an autism spectrum child up to 40%. So it's a big deal, yeah.
And finally, by the way, I think we might have been one of the last so-called advanced industrialized countries to permit the fortification of prenatal supplements with DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, which actually many other countries were way out in front in terms of urging that, for pregnant women, because of its importance in terms of outcomes.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks, at this point, let's pause and allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to share an important message with you. So here goes. Listen up.
Has your digestive health been striking out due to poor food choices, medications, stress, and other lifestyle issues? This season, hit a home run for your digestive health with Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics is a live probiotic encapsulated in small, easy-to-swallow capsules that delivers Dr. Ohhira's signature blend of pre, pro, and postbiotics. Dr. Ohhira's award-winning formula contains a prebiotic blend of fruits and vegetables, which are naturally fermented with 13 strains of live probiotic bacteria for a minimum of 3 years. The result? Dr. Ohhira's game-changing postbiotic metabolites, which are key to supporting long-term digestive, immune, and cognitive function. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, an all-star formulation and the best probiotic on the market today for overall digestive health and wellness. Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, available at Sprouts, Natural Grocers, and other natural health retailers nationwide.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting our sponsors. They, of course, are what make Intelligent Medicine a continuing free resource to you. And now back to today's guest, Dr. Sherrod Paul. So also, paradoxically, and we mentioned melanoma. Melanoma, of course, a skin disorder, too much sunburn can increase the risk for melanoma. We know that. But paradoxically, low vitamin D is associated with a higher risk of melanoma. So is there maybe like a Goldilocks effect? The right amount of sunlight may somewhat attenuate the risk of melanoma?
Yeah, I think it's partly also because, like I said, I think vitamin D, as you know, is fundamentally a hormone rather than a vitamin, right? Mm-hmm. Because typically vitamins are things we don't produce in our body and we get from outside, whereas we do produce vitamin D from the sun. So it's fundamentally a calcium regulator. And I think what we know is it's a barometer of disease states. So even when we're studying people with advanced melanoma who are doing poorly, we can see they have lower vitamin D levels. So I think what it is in that situation is actually indicates how healthy you are, right? So even when people recently looked at COVID or other infections and they looked at admission rates or they looked at intensive care rates, there is a correlation between vitamin D. And I think it just sort of is an indicator. Exactly. There's a Goldilocks effect that you want to be, have enough vitamin D in your system, and that keeps you optimized to manage many diseases.
So it doesn't necessarily suggest that tons of vitamin D is right for everyone to fend off all manner of harm. It's just that low vitamin D may be a correlate, not necessarily the cause of ill health. Because I think that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
And particularly in people like, with darker skin, people who don't absorb it well, they particularly have a lower risk. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a much higher risk of having low vitamin D levels. So for them,
migrated from tropical zones where they may have been wearing less clothes and working outside as agricultural workers, and now they're urban workers in Saskatchewan or something,
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So you also tackle issues like homocysteine. Homocysteine
yes,
is of interest because we know that it's something that's amenable to a nutritional fix, and it is considered a potentially cardiovascular risk factor. Some of the cardiovascular risk factors are not amenable to nutritional fixes. I think Lp(a) is an example of that. You can't really fix it with diet. Homocysteine, yes, and specifically certain supplements.
Yeah, I think folic acid, as we know, particularly because of, you mentioned methylation earlier, and we know that, life on Earth is carbon-based life. So folate is a great carbon donor. So in its methylene form, obviously you produce homocysteine, and it goes on to produce methionine. So I think the key to, longevity, and when people are looking at a health span, it's methionine restriction, right? And not accumulation of homocysteine. And I think because when we're talking about methylation, if you have too much methylation, then of course, there is a Goldilocks effect, because too much methylation turns off your suppressor genes, including your ENCORE suppressor genes. But definitely folic acid has been shown to also reduce the biological clock. At the moment, the evidence is more for women than men, because of course men need more amounts of folate in their diet to get the same, blood levels. But yeah, absolutely. And of course, even things in the diet, like, folic acid rich diet, green leafy vegetables, things like choline, which is a different, a donor as well in the same pathway, methyl donor. So I think, they make a big difference.
Indeed. And so you're into genetic testing. And in fact, you offer a genetic testing service at, I believe it's at biohackyourgenes.com. Is that correct?
Biohackingyourgenes.com.
Biohackingyourgenes.
Yeah, just same as the book. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So homocysteine is one of those things that through a spit test, so this is generally collected with saliva, or any bodily fluid, a cheek swab, or blood could do it, but we do it commonly just with a saliva test. We can actually determine one's susceptibility to the need for more methyl donors. This is sometimes called the test for methylation, which is there's certain variants. Can you explain that and how that fits?
So the most typical thing is the MTHFR, or the methylene tetrahydrofolate gene, which is implicated in the production of methyl tetrahydrofolate, which then is a cofactor in homocysteine being broken down. So some people don't produce it well enough, so they accumulate higher levels of homocysteine. Mm-hmm. And so this increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes, particularly more so in men. And in fact, more so in people with no predisposing other factors. So sometimes these are the people you hear about, they're in the gym in the middle ages and suddenly they drop dead, and we can see a high correlation, right?
They're dutifully taking their statins. They're doing all the right things, but
absolutely,
there's something that is beyond the control of the medications or even their diets and lifestyle.
Yeah.
It puts them at risk.
Because I think medicine works on an illness model, right? Once you diagnose something, you're treating it with medications, but there is a lot of stuff we can do and preventative personalized healthcare as well.
And incidentally, I just saw a study, the studies on this keep coming in. This is a study on the 677 variant of MTHFR. And as you know, you can be heterozygous or homozygous. You get one hit or you get a double hit. The same thing with the so-called Alzheimer's disease. One hit is kind of bad, but not terrible. Double hit is pretty bad. So same thing with this 677 thing. And if you got a double hit on that, they say that if you come down with COVID, you're more at risk for serious hospitalization and dying. Interesting, huh? Because that is such a determinant of one's susceptibility to a wide variety of diseases, even, I think, potentially dementia. That's something that we look for, right?
Absolutely.
So in writing your book, and there's a wide variety of topics that you address, what would you say is the biggest surprise that you uncovered in your research for this book?
I think the biggest surprise is really how much of a difference we can make ourselves just from diet and lifestyles, especially when you personalize it. And I think just the magnitude in various research studies which have looked at various different modeling methods, it's just so significant. Like I didn't really think, because in medicine, when you work in oncology, like me, you look, one part of it is cancer, if you think about it, is like our most hyped immune system, right? For a cancer cell, right? So that is your cancer cell's immune system. So we've learned a lot of lessons from that, but in medicine, we apply it only for illness. Like if somebody's got really advanced melanoma, for instance, we're doing genetic testing to see what kind of things would work for them.
So now there's certain drugs that target certain mutations, so we can have like a sort of a laser-like attack on the cancer. So we characterize the cancer with genetic testing. But you're saying, let's not wait till the cancer develops. Let's do the genetics first.
Yeah, but we don't do it. But we don't do it for wellness. Like what I'm trying to get at is we don't do it for how can I have my best energy levels, or how can I optimize my homocysteine, like you said, levels, or how can I, my vitamin D. Because some people, for example, in the genetic testing, even things like don't metabolize caffeine well. Like for example, like a common example, right? 50% of the population, roughly, we find are fast metabolizer of caffeine and about 50% are slow. So if you're a fast metabolizer, then actually caffeine is very good for you, the more coffee you have. And these are the guys who had studies which shows having 4 cups a day is great for you, like in Finland.
They're unfazed by it, yeah. That's not me.
That's right.
By the way, I'm the middle. I'm like, I've got half of the slow and half of the fast. So I'm sort of like moderate, but not a great idea to, if a waiter slips me regular coffee instead of decaf at the end of a meal, I'm going to have a bad night.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing though is, but that's interesting. I'm like you, like if I have a coffee in the afternoon, I can't sleep at night, right? So I thought I would be a slow metabolizer, but it's actually not that intuitive. I am a fast metabolizer, but there are 2 parts to caffeine. On one part is the metabolism to do with your cardiovascular health. So in that, I was actually fine because I'm a fast metabolizer. Then there is a part of caffeine which is purely for your psychological anxiety, sleep, and that is to do with how tight your binding is to adenosine, which competes with dopamine receptors in the brain. So people like you and I, we have tighter binding. So therefore, actually what it means is that we're more likely to stay awake with coffee. But it also means like people like us are also more likely to have personalities which can get, I guess more addicted to certain things more easily if you're not careful.
I think I fit that category. I got to be very careful. All right, good stuff. Because I want to talk a little bit more about the subject of genetic testing and how it can inform our choices, specifically a field called nutrigenomics. We're going to get into that in part 2, because nutrigenomics is a field which attempts to prognosticate what diet, what supplements might be best for us. Is it ready for prime time? Our guest is going to share his thoughts on it. Dr. Sharad Paul is author of Biohacking Your Genes, 25 Laws for a Smarter, Healthier, and Longer Life. And also is, I guess, the originator and developer of biohackingyourgenes.com, which is a place where you can actually obtain tests. And this is direct to consumer, right? You can just do this.
Yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
require a doctor's
because it's for
prescription.
wellness and that's right.
Wellness and
It is not-
optimization.
That's right.
Good stuff. All right. When we return, more of our discussion about biohacking your genes. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and this is the Intelligent Medicine Podcast.